Now, my conclusion of the 4-scale build was the original kit was a somewhat small structure to start with, and that can work well in O-scale layout where space is at a premium, and it can offer you a lot of detailing opportunities. For smaller scales, a smaller structure will go together very quickly, and it can be part of an overall scene, but from a modeling perspective, there's not as much enjoyment as building it because there's just not as much there. What I've seen in all of our builds of the same kit is that many of the modeling techniques and materials used are the same throughout, although there's a variety depending on the modeler. The variety of how the kit's built shows what one kit can be like when it's in the hands of a variety of modelers. And I'd like to open it up to Phil and Bob, and unfortunately Clark isn't with us. Phil has had an insight into this that I'd like him to share with us.
So what was interesting is and actually if you look at this kit, it's almost too small in N scale. In other words, it becomes this interesting thought that says that the actual size of a kit has real impact in its value within a scale. So in O scale, you can get a siding, if you use this building in some way, you can get a siding, or you can get some building to fill a small space. But if you go down to N scale, it would strike that maybe you don't ever want to build this small of a building, because saving the space, the physical space, is much less important in N scale. And if you think about it that way, there's actually a really interesting question for model builders, which is, do you kind of drive the size of the buildings you build kits around to be able to be in a specific scale? It's kind of at a Goldilocks. So for example, if I build a building that is a 6 by 8 inch footprint in O scale, it becomes 4 by 2 in HO. But if I start with 4 by 8 in HO, it's now 16 by 8 in O scale. And this thought process for manufacturers, it was kind of an interesting thought. I was thinking it might be interesting to look at some of the manufacturers' product lines and see, kind of how they stay to a certain envelope, especially if it's a multi-scale kit. So it might be an interesting discussion sometime to have. But clearly, your layout needs based on scale for actual size of buildings, actual footprint, is going to be greater in N scale, because in N scale, you can have a larger building and have 2 sidings instead of having a small building that's got 1. So anyway, those just some interesting thoughts about seeing a kit in 4 scales. The other thing that I think would be interesting to talk to Jeff about is the challenges for the vendor in trying to do the CAD design for something that has such a wide range of other pieces. And there were some clear things that were different in some of the kits. The O scale had, fingers on the end of the buildings. All the others used a corner block kind of construction. So there was a little bit different in how the construction was done. And I'd be curious to understand from the vendors who do a lot of CAD, how that impacts kind of their design. And it may explain why a lot of people do 1 or 2 scales, but that's all they do. Because what they realize is trying to take that building and do it in another scale is a lot of effort, and it probably won't sell very much because it's not well suited for what users in that scale want to buy. Anyway, that was kind of the thought process. I don't know.
Well, and one of the things, Phil, that I've noticed from all of us building the same kit, and it's something I've noticed in railroading in general, but this kind of brings it to a point, is the scale that you're modeling in can sometimes determine the type of details you're going to be modeling.
Yep.
In your case, and in most O-scale buildings, you have the ability to model an interior, and you can get very detailed in the interior, like your letters in the mailboxes. I'm sure you put stamps on them and might have even had addresses. I don't know. But N-scale layouts, the detailing is more in all the details around the layout, because you're not able to put the detailing in the buildings. And in some cases, even detailing on the outside of the buildings is limited. But that doesn't mean an N-scale layout won't be as detailed. It's just going to be more in all of the little details that you put in, all the little buildings you can fit on the layout. And a friend of mine with a beautiful N-scale Western Maryland layout is as detailed as any layout I've ever seen. And it's not in the individual buildings, it's just in all the little pieces and parts he has around them.
So I think it was it was a very interesting build concept, because it does cause you to think about, the size of things you want to pick in your scale and how it relates to the available area you have. So anyway, enough said. It was a good build. I thank Jeff again for providing the kits and helping with the build.
And Phil,
Bob?
thank you for the idea.
Bob, do you have any comments?
Oh, I was going to say I did the S scale one. I normally model in HO scale, so this is the very first build on S scale they've done, and I would like to have done detail in the interior. I don't have the parts available. It's going to take too long to make them from scratch, so I just left the windows and doors, the doors and the freight doors closed, so I didn't have to detail the interior. But S scale, it would be good for doing detail like Phil did with the O scale. So. But anyway, I got around it.
I think that's the popularity of SN3, because generally the locomotive powered rolling stock are relatively HO sized, and you get the S scale that lets you do more interior and detail, but it's not as big as O. So it's kind of that Goldilocks scale if you do it in narrow gauge.
Just right.
Anyway,
Guys,
enough said.
I want to thank you so much, all of you, for doing it. Clark Cooney, of course, was the fourth member. He's ill this evening and can't join us. And Clark built the model in scale, and you've heard him talk about that, his build and what he did with his model. But I want to thank all four of you for everything that you've done here, because I think it did show the difference in scale. And that's what we were trying to do. And for people that might be interested in looking at another scale or considering a scale maybe for the first time, I think that this was an interesting program for them to see the difference in the model, the size of the model, what's available for the different model, for the same model in different scales. And for that, I think you accomplished the goal, and thank you so much for all your help.